The large classroom was silent as Zethkari walked to the front. His forearms moved slowly, and his hard shell-like skin made small clicking sounds with each step. The young alien cadets from different worlds watched him with wide eyes. Some had never seen a Valthonian warrior before. Others had heard stories about the famous commander who had fought in the Great War against the humans. Zethkari stood at the podium and looked at the eager faces before him. There were Krellians with their blue scales, Zephyrians with their long tentacles, and even a few Mordakians with their crystal-like bodies. All of them wanted to hear about the war. All of them thought they knew what war was like. "You want to hear about the humans," Zethkari said in his deep voice. "You think you know what happened during the Third Galactic War. You think you understand why we fear them now." A young Krellian cadet raised his hand. "Sir, we studied the battle reports. The humans were weak. They had small ships and few soldiers. How could they defeat the mighty Valthonian Empire?" Zethkari's eyes, all four of them, focused on the cadet. "That is exactly what I thought 20 years ago. I was wrong. Dead wrong." The old warrior moved to the window and looked out at the peaceful campus of the Intergalactic Military Academy. Ships from 100 worlds flew peacefully through the sky. Trade vessels, passenger transports, and even military ships moved together without conflict. It was hard to believe that 20 years ago, this same sky had been filled with the fire of war. "I was Commander Zethkari of the 3rd Assault Fleet," he began. "I had won battles on 47 worlds. I had never lost a single fight. My fleet was the pride of the Valthonian Empire. 200 of our best warships, each one armed with weapons that could destroy a small moon." He turned back to face the cadets. "We were heading to a small human colony called New Portland. It was on a world they called Kepler 4.2b. Our intelligence report said the humans had maybe 10 ships to defend the whole system. 10 ships against our 200. A Zephyrian cadet made a sound that was like laughing. 10 against 200? That was not a battle. That was target practice. "That is what I thought," Zethkari said. "That is what we all thought. The humans were new to space travel. They had only been flying between stars for about 50 years. We Valtronians have been conquering worlds for over 1,000 years. The Krellians and Zephyrians were our allies, and together we had never lost a war." Zethkari walked back to the front of the room. His clawed hands gripped the edge of the podium. The humans looked so weak in the reports. They had no natural armor like us Valtronians. They had no poison claws like the Krellians. They could not change their body shape like the Zephyrians. They were just soft, pink creatures with thin skin and weak bones. The cadets nodded. Everyone knew humans were physically weak compared to most alien species. "But there was something in the intelligence reports that I should have paid more attention to," Zethkari continued. "The humans had been fighting wars on their homeworld for thousands of years. Not wars against other species, but wars against each other. Constant, never-ending wars." He paused and looked around the room. "How many of you have fought in a real war?" Only a few hands went up. Most of the cadets were too young to have seen real combat. "How many of you have killed another living being with your own hands?" Even fewer hands stayed up. The humans we were going to fight had been doing both since they were children. Not because they were evil, but because their world made them that way. Their planet was what they called a death world. Everything on it was trying to kill them. The weather, the animals, the plants, even tiny creatures too small to see. Zethkari began to pace back and forth. "When we arrived at the Kepler system, I was confident. I had fought the proud Corvanian Empire and won. I had defeated the crystal cities of Zerion Prime. I had even beaten the machine armies of the synthetic worlds. Humans would be easy." He stopped pacing, and his voice became quieter. "I was so wrong." The old warrior moved to a display screen and activated it. A map of the Kepler system appeared, showing planets, moons, and asteroid belts. "This is where it began," he said, pointing to the outer edge of the system. "We came out of faster-than-light travel here near the asteroid belt. I expected to see the human ships waiting in a defensive formation near their planet. That is what every other species does. They protect their home world." The cadets leaned forward to get a better look at the map. But the humans were not near their planet. They were here in the asteroid belt, waiting for us. Only 8 ships, just like our intelligence had said. But they were not lined up in neat formations like proper military ships. They were scattered among the asteroids, hiding like pirates. Seth Kari's voice grew darker. I thought they were cowards. I thought they were afraid to fight us in open space. I ordered my fleet to move into the asteroid field and destroy them, quickly. He touched the screen and red dots appeared, showing the positions of his ships as they entered the asteroid field. Lieutenant Jake Morrison was the leader of the human fighter squadron. I learned his name later, after we captured some of their records. He was flying a ship that was smaller than our shuttles. One hit from any of our weapons would have destroyed it completely. The display showed the movement of the ships as the battle began. Morrison did something I had never seen before. Instead of running away or trying to fight from a distance, he flew his tiny ship directly at one of our largest cruisers. I thought he was going to surrender. Instead, he opened fire with everything he had. Seth Kari paused, remembering. His weapons could not even scratch our armor. But he was not trying to damage our ship. He was shooting at the asteroids around us. Understanding began to show on some of the cadets' faces. Morrison shot 3 large asteroids, causing them to break apart and crash into each other. The explosion created a field of fast-moving rocks that hit 5 of our ships. 2 cruisers were completely destroyed. 3 more were badly damaged. A Mordakian cadet made a sound of disbelief. 1 small fighter destroyed 2 cruisers? Not directly, Seth Kari said. Morrison used the asteroids as weapons. He turned the battlefield itself into his ally. It was brilliant and completely insane at the same time. The old warrior continued his story. But that was just the beginning. When we tried to capture Morrison after his ship was damaged, he did not surrender. He did not beg for mercy. He just looked at us and smiled. Then he said something I will never forget. Seth Kari's voice became very quiet. He said, "That's just Tuesday for us." Just Tuesday. As if destroying 2 warships with asteroids was something humans did every day. The classroom was completely silent now. Even the youngest cadets understood that this was not going to be a story about an easy victory. We had barely started fighting, and already the humans had shown us something new. They did not fight the way we expected. They did not follow the rules of civilized warfare. They used everything around them as a weapon. Seth Kari looked around the room at the young faces. At that moment, I should have ordered my fleet to retreat. I should have called for reinforcements. I should have realized that we were not fighting a normal enemy. He paused, and his 4 eyes seemed to look into the past. Instead, I got angry. I ordered all ships to advance and destroy every human in the system. I wanted to show them that the Valthonian Empire could not be stopped by tricks and luck. The old warrior's voice became very serious. That decision doomed thousands of my soldiers, because what happened next taught me the most important lesson of my military career. He looked directly at the cadets. Never underestimate an enemy who has nothing left to lose. Seth Kari moved away from the display screen and walked closer to the cadets. His 4 arms crossed over his chest as he remembered the horror that came next. After Morrison destroyed 2 of our cruisers with asteroids, I thought we had seen the worst of human tactics. I was wrong again. What happened in the next few hours changed everything I knew about warfare. The old warrior sat down on the edge of his desk. Even after 20 years, talking about the battle made him tired. Captain Ron Hayes was another human pilot. His ship was even smaller than Morrison's. When my fleet regrouped after the asteroid attack, Hayes came at us alone. 1 tiny fighter against nearly 200 warships. A young Krellian cadet raised his hand. "Sir, that sounds like suicide." "That is exactly what I thought," Seth Kari said. But Hayes was not trying to die uselessly. He was doing something much more dangerous. The old commander stood up and began pacing again. Hayes flew his ship in patterns that made no sense. He would dive toward one of our ships, then suddenly turn and fly toward an asteroid. Then he would spin around and charge at a different ship. Our gunners could not predict where he would go next. Seth Kari activated the display again, showing the chaotic flight path of Hayes's ship. For 20 minutes, Hayes led half my fleet on a chase through the asteroid field. We fired thousands of shots at him and missed every time. He was flying like a mad creature, but there was a method to his madness. The cadets watched the red line zigzag across the screen, showing Hayes's impossible flight pattern. Then Hayes did something that still gives me nightmares. He flew directly at a large asteroid and did not pull away. I thought he had finally made a mistake. His ship hit the asteroid at full speed. Zethkari paused, his eyes unfocused as he remembered. But Hayes had not made a mistake. The asteroid was hollow inside, and he had known it. His ship went through the asteroid like a bullet through paper, but the explosion of his engines destabilized the asteroid's structure. The display showed what happened next. The asteroid broke apart in a massive explosion that sent huge chunks of rock flying in all directions. 3 of my cruisers were caught in the explosion. 1 was destroyed completely. The other 2 were so badly damaged they had to retreat, and Hayes flew out the other side of the asteroid, his ship damaged, but still fighting. A Zephyrian cadet made a sound of disbelief. How did he know the asteroid was hollow? The humans had been mining in this system for years, Zethkari explained. They knew every rock, every cave, every hiding place. They had turned their own territory into a weapon against us. The old warrior walked to the window and looked out at the peaceful sky. When we finally captured Hayes after his ship was shot down, I expected him to be afraid. I expected him to beg for his life. Instead, he looked at me with these strange human eyes and smiled. Zethkari turned back to face the cadets. Hayes said something that confused me at the time. He said, "That's just Tuesday for us." The same thing Morrison had said. I asked him what Tuesday meant. Hayes laughed and said, "It means we're just getting started." The classroom was completely quiet. The young aliens were beginning to understand that this was not a normal war story. While the space battle was happening, I had sent ground troops to capture the human moon base. Major Kate Sullivan was the human commander there. She had only 300 soldiers to defend against my 3,000 elite warriors. Zethkari activated a new display showing the layout of the moon base. The base was built inside an old mining facility. Tunnels and caves went deep into the moon's surface. I thought my troops would capture it in a few hours. The old commander's voice became darker. My soldiers entered the base expecting to find humans hiding behind barricades, ready to surrender. Instead, they found empty corridors and complete silence. No humans anywhere. He paused, remembering the fear in his soldiers' voices over the radio. Then the psychological warfare began. Human voices started coming through the ventilation systems. They were speaking perfect Valthonian language, but saying things that no civilized being should say. Zethkari looked directly at a young Valthonian. "Cadet." They described in detail what they planned to do to my soldiers. Not just kill them, but worse things. Things that violated every rule of honorable combat. My elite troops, veterans of 50 battles, started to panic after hearing these voices. The old warrior began pacing again, his claws clicking on the floor. But the voices were just the beginning. My soldiers started disappearing. Not killed, in battle, just gone. Security cameras would show a corridor with 5 soldiers walking through it. Then the cameras would go dark for a few seconds. When they came back on, only 3 soldiers would be there. A Mordekian cadet asked, "Where did the missing soldiers go?" "We found them later," Zethkari said quietly. The humans had been hiding in spaces too small for Valthonian bodies. Inside walls, under floors, and ventilation shafts barely wide enough for their thin frames. They would grab my soldiers and drag them into these hiding places. The old commander stopped pacing and gripped the podium again. When my troops finally found a group of humans, they expected the humans to surrender. After all, they were surrounded and outnumbered 10-1. Zethkari's 4 eyes closed for a moment. Corporal Dan Miller and Private Amy Foster were leading the human group. There were only 12 humans total. My soldiers had them completely surrounded with no way to escape. He opened his eyes and looked at the cadets. Miller looked at my troops and started laughing. Not the laugh of someone who was afraid or crazy, the laugh of someone who was exactly where he wanted to be. The old warrior's voice became very quiet. Then Miller said something in human language. Foster and the other humans all nodded. They raised their weapons and charged directly at my soldiers. The cadets leaned forward, not believing what they were hearing. 12 humans charged at 60 Valthonian elite warriors. They did not try to find cover. They did not try to escape. They just ran straight at us while making the most terrible sounds I have ever heard, Zethkari demonstrated, letting out a sound that was part roar, part scream. The humans call them war cries. Every human culture has them. Sounds designed to terrify enemies and give courage to allies. When 12 humans screamed at the same time in those narrow tunnels, even my bravest soldiers stepped backward. The old commander walked to the center of the room. But the war cries were not the worst. The worst part was how the humans fought. They used weapons in both hands. When their guns ran out of ammunition, they used knives. When their knives broke, they used their bare hands and teeth. He paused, his voice shaking slightly. Private Foster was shot 6 times by energy weapons, wounds that would kill any Valthonian, instantly. But she kept fighting. She used her own blood to blind a Krellian warrior, then killed him with a broken piece of metal. Zethkari looked around the room at the horrified faces of the cadets. But what truly terrified my soldiers was not how fierce the humans were. It was how they worked together. Without any visible communication, they moved like parts of the same creature. When one human fell, another immediately took his place. They seemed to know what each other was thinking. The old warrior sat down heavily in his chair. Miller was the last human standing. He had been shot 12 times and stabbed twice. Any reasonable being would have died from those wounds. But Miller looked at my soldiers and smiled again. Zethkari's voice became almost a whisper. Miller said, "Tell your friends we said hello." Then he pulled out a grenade and blew himself up, taking 5 of my elite warriors with him. The classroom was completely silent. Several of the younger cadets looked sick. That was when I realized we were not fighting a normal enemy. We were fighting a species that had evolved to be warriors. Every single human was a soldier, whether they wore a uniform or not. Zethkari stood up slowly. And that was just the beginning of the nightmare that would haunt my dreams for the next 20 years. Zethkari walked to the water dispenser in the corner of the classroom and took a long drink. His hands were shaking slightly as he held the cup. Even after 20 years, talking about the underground battles still affected him deeply. We lost so many soldiers in the moon base, I should have pulled back and changed our strategy. But I was angry and proud. I thought if we sent more troops, we could overwhelm the humans with pure numbers. The old warrior returned to his position, at the front of the classroom. The cadets watched him carefully, noting how his normally confident posture had changed. The main human settlement on New Portland was built on top of old mining tunnels. The humans had been digging in that ground for 30 years, pulling out metals and rare minerals. I thought this would make our job easier. Surely humans hiding in holes would be easy to dig out. Zethkari activated the display screen again. This time it showed a cross-section view of the underground tunnel system. The network of passages looked like the inside of an insect nest, with tunnels going in every direction. I was wrong again. The tunnels were not just hiding places. They were a 3-dimensional battlefield, where humans held every advantage. Young Krellian cadet raised his hand. "Sir, how could they have an advantage? Your soldiers had better armor and weapons." "That is what I thought," Zethkari replied. "But in those narrow tunnels, our advantages became weaknesses. Our soldiers were too big to move quickly through the small passages. Our energy weapons were too powerful and would cause cave-ins if we used them at full strength." The old commander pointed to different areas on the tunnel map. Sergeant Ben Clark was the human leader of something they called the Tunnel Rats. These were humans who had trained specifically for underground fighting. They knew every passage, every dead end, every weak spot in the tunnel walls. Zethkari began pacing again, his forearms moving as he talked. Clark's soldiers did not fight with normal military weapons. They used the mining equipment as tools of war. Steam pipes became flamethrowers. Mining charges became bombs. Even simple digging tools became deadly weapons in their hands. The display showed pictures of mining equipment that had been turned into improvised weapons. When my troops entered the tunnels, they expected to find humans hiding in the deepest parts, as far from the surface as possible. Instead, Clark had positioned his soldiers throughout the entire tunnel system. Every corner could hide an enemy. Every passage could be a trap. Zethkari stopped pacing and looked directly at the cadets. The first thing the humans did was flood the tunnels with steam and industrial chemicals. This made our thermal sensors and night vision equipment completely useless. In the darkness and fog, my soldiers could not see more than a few feet in any direction. He activated a recording device on the podium. The sounds that came out made several cadets jump in their seats. This is what my soldiers heard in those tunnels. These are actual recordings from their helmet communications. The sounds were terrifying. Strange echoes, metallic clanging, and underneath it all, human voices singing something in their own language. The humans were singing while they fought. Not screaming or shouting orders, but singing together like they were at some kind of celebration. My soldiers found this more frightening than any war cry. Zeth Kari turned off the recording. Captain Julie Price was one of Clark's demolition experts. She had been working in these mines since she was 16 years old. She knew exactly where to place explosives to bring down specific tunnel sections, without affecting the rest of the system. The old warrior's voice became darker. Price would wait until my soldiers entered a tunnel section, then collapse both ends, trapping them inside. But she would not just leave them there. She would flood the trapped sections with poisonous mining gases or superheated steam. A Zephyrian cadet made a sound of disgust. That is not honorable combat. Honor, Zeth Kari said slowly. The humans had a different idea about honor. For them, honor meant protecting their home and their people by any means necessary. They did not care if their methods were considered civilized by galactic standards. The old commander walked to the window and stared out at the sky. I decided to lead a group of my best soldiers into the tunnels personally. I thought if the humans saw a high-ranking officer, they might surrender rather than continue this hopeless fight. He turned back to face the cadets. I took 12 of my elite guards, all veterans of multiple campaigns. We entered the tunnels, through the main mining shaft, following the largest passage toward what our sensors said was the human command center. Zeth Kari activated the display again, showing his route through the tunnel system. We had advanced about half a kilometer when we encountered Captain Price. She was alone, sitting in the middle of the tunnel passage like she was waiting for us. The old warrior's 4 eyes closed as he remembered. Price was covered in dirt and mining dust. She had several wounds that were bleeding, but she did not seem to notice them. When she saw us approaching with our weapons ready, she did something that still haunts my dreams. Zeth Kari opened his eyes and looked directly at the cadets. She laughed. Not the desperate laugh of someone who had gone crazy from fear. The happy laugh of someone who was exactly where she wanted to be. The classroom was completely silent except for the sound of the old warrior's claws clicking on the podium. I ordered Price to surrender. I told her that her position was hopeless, and that we would treat her well if she gave up. Price looked at me and my 12 elite guards, and she kept laughing. Zeth Kari's voice became very quiet. Then Price said something I will never forget. She said, "You boys picked the wrong tunnel." Before I could ask what she meant, she held up a small device in her hand. The old commander paused, his breathing becoming heavier. Price had filled that entire section of tunnel with mining explosives, enough to bring down half a mountain. She was going to blow up herself and all of us together. Several of the cadets gasped in shock. I tried to rush forward and stop her, but Price pressed the button before I could reach her. Her last words were, "See you in hell, bug boys." Zeth Kari sat down heavily in his chair. The explosion killed Price instantly and collapsed over 2 kilometers of tunnels. I lost all 12 of my elite guards. I only survived because I was wearing experimental armor that protected me from the worst of the blast. The old warrior looked around the room at the horrified faces of the young cadets. But Price's sacrifice was not just about killing enemy soldiers. The tunnel collapse cut off my main force from their supply lines and trapped over 300 of my troops. In the lower sections of the mine, he activated the display to show the changed tunnel system after the explosion. Staff Sergeant Nick Torres led the rescue attempt to reach my trapped soldiers. He had only 20 human Marines with him, but they knew passages through the collapsed areas that my troops could not find. Zeth Kari's voice became even quieter. Torres and his team moved through the ruins like ghosts. They would appear, attack my soldiers, then disappear back into passages too small for Valthonian bodies. My trapped troops started to panic as their numbers got smaller and smaller. The old commander stood up slowly. When my soldiers finally cornered Torres and his team in a dead-end tunnel, they had nowhere to run. I thought finally we would capture some humans alive and end this nightmare. Zeth Kari walked to the center of the room. But Torres did not try to surrender. Instead, he and his Marines started singing again. The same kind of songs we had heard throughout the tunnels. They called them cadence songs, military marching songs that soldiers sing to keep their spirits up. The old warrior's voice cracked slightly. They sang while they fought to the death. 20 human voices echoing through the tunnels, getting Fewer and fewer as my soldiers killed them one by one. Torres was the last voice, singing alone until the very end. Zethkari looked around the room at the stunned faces of the cadets. When it was over, I had lost over half my ground forces in those tunnels. The humans were all dead, but they had turned their own burial ground into a graveyard for my army. The old warrior walked back to his desk and sat down, and we still had not reached the main human settlement. The real battle was yet to come. Zethkari stood up from his desk and walked slowly to the front of the classroom. His movements were careful and deliberate, like those of someone carrying a heavy burden. The cadets could see that telling this story was becoming more difficult for the old warrior with each part. After the disaster in the tunnels, I had lost more than half my ground forces. My fleet in space was down to less than 100 ships. Any reasonable commander would have retreated and called for reinforcements. The old warrior activated the display screen, showing an overhead view of the main human settlement on New Portland. But I was not thinking reasonably anymore. I was angry, frustrated, and desperate to prove that the Valthonian Empire could not be defeated by a handful of humans. I ordered my remaining forces to attack the Colonial Administration Center. He pointed to a cluster of buildings in the center of the settlement. This was where the remaining humans had gathered for their last stand. Our sensors showed only 300 human soldiers left alive. I still had over 2,000 troops and the support of my fleet in orbit. Zethkari looked around the room at the young faces watching him. By every military calculation in every textbook, the battle should have been over in 30 minutes. The humans had limited ammunition, no air support, and no possibility of reinforcement or escape. The old commander paused, his forearms crossed over his chest. Instead, the battle lasted for 3 days. A young Mordakian cadet raised his hand. "Sir, how is that possible? 300 against 2,000? "That is what I kept asking myself," Zethkari replied. "But the humans did something that I had never seen in 50 years of warfare. They demonstrated what they called force multiplication. The display changed to show the interior layout of the administration building. Colonel Eric Johnson and Major Rachel King were commanding the human defense. They had turned every room, every hallway, every staircase into a separate fortress. When my troops captured one floor, the humans would retreat to the next level and keep fighting. Zethkari began pacing again, his claws clicking on the floor. The humans used everything as a weapon. Office desks became barricades, fire extinguishers became bombs. Even simple things like staplers and paperweights became deadly projectiles in their hands. The old warrior stopped pacing and looked directly at the cadets. But the most incredible thing was how they adapted as the battle went on. When they ran out of rifle ammunition, they switched to pistols. When the pistols were empty, they used knives and bayonets. When their blades broke, they fought with their bare hands. He activated a new section of the display, showing a narrow stairwell inside the building. Lieutenant Chris Martinez held this stairwell alone for 6 hours. 6 hours against wave after wave of my best soldiers. He started with a rifle, then a pistol, then just a bayonet attached to a broken rifle. Zethkari's voice became filled with something that sounded almost like respect. Martinez was wounded 7 times during those 6 hours. Energy weapon burns that should have killed him instantly. But he kept fighting, kept holding that stairwell, kept my soldiers from reaching the upper floors. The old commander walked to the window and stared out at the peaceful sky. When my troops finally overran Martinez's position, they found him still alive, still trying to fight even though he could barely stand. He had wounds that would have put any Valthonian warrior in a medical coma. Zethkari turned back to face the cadets. But Martinez did not beg for mercy or ask for medical help. He looked up at my soldiers with these strange human eyes and smiled. Then he said something that I still hear in my nightmares. The old warrior's voice became very quiet. Martinez said, "Tell them we were here." Then he closed his eyes and died. Just like that. No drama. No speeches. He just wanted to make sure that someone would remember that he and his fellow humans had fought in this place. Several of the younger cadets looked uncomfortable. This was not the kind of glorious battle story they had expected to hear. But Martinez was not the worst part of that battle, Zethkari continued. The worst part was what happened when I came face to face with one of the youngest human soldiers. The old commander sat down on the edge of his desk. Private Sam Collins. was barely out of training. He could not have been more than 19 years old in human terms. He was half my size and armed with nothing but a broken knife and determination. Zethkari's 4 eyes closed as he remembered. I found Collins in the building's main lobby, standing over the bodies of 3 Krellian soldiers. He was wounded, badly and breathing hard, but he still raised his weapon when he saw me approaching. The old warrior opened his eyes and looked around the room. I expected Collins to be afraid. I expected him to surrender when he realized he was facing a Valthonian commander. Instead, he looked me in the eyes and I saw something that confused me. Zethkari stood up and walked closer to the cadets. Collins was not afraid of me. He was not angry or desperate or crazy. He looked sad, genuinely sad, like he felt sorry for me. A Zephyrian cadet made a sound of confusion. Sorry for you? Why would he feel sorry for an enemy commander? That is exactly what I asked him, Zethkari replied. Collins looked at me with those strange human eyes and said, I'm sorry you had to come here. I'm sorry your soldiers had to die in this place, but we can't let you take our home. The old warrior's voice became very emotional. Then this 19-year-old human, wounded and outnumbered, charged at me with nothing but a broken knife. He knew he could not win. He knew he was going to die. But he attacked anyway, because that was his duty as a defender of his people. Zethkari walked back to the display screen. Collins fought me for almost 10 minutes. 10 minutes of hand-to-hand combat against an opponent twice his size with 4 times his strength. He used speed and intelligence to avoid my claws. Always moving, always fighting, never giving up. The old commander touched the screen, bringing up tactical diagrams of the final battle. When Collins finally fell, I realized something terrible. This young human had not been trying to kill me. He had been trying to buy time for his fellow soldiers to escape to better defensive positions. Zethkari's voice cracked slightly. Collins died to give his friends 30 more seconds of life. 30 seconds that might mean the difference between victory and defeat for his people. The classroom was completely silent. Even the mechanical sounds of the building's air circulation system seemed muted. The building finally fell on the 3rd day. We captured it room by room, floor by floor. But when the fighting was over, I looked around at my remaining forces and realized the truth. The old warrior walked back to his chair and sat down heavily. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. Of my original fleet of 200 ships, only 47 were still functional. Of my ground army of 5,000 elite soldiers, fewer than 800 were still able to fight. Zethkari looked around the room at the stunned faces of the cadets. The humans were all dead. Every single defender of New Portland had died fighting, but they had accomplished something impossible. 300 soldiers had destroyed an entire Valthonian assault fleet. The old commander's voice became very quiet. But the worst part was not the casualties or the damaged ships. The worst part was what had happened to my surviving soldiers. He activated a medical display showing stress analysis reports. My troops were showing signs of what human psychologists call combat stress reaction. They were having nightmares, panic attacks, and emotional breakdowns. Elite Valthonian warriors who had fought on dozens of worlds were afraid to enter dark spaces or hear sudden noises. Zethkari stood up slowly. The humans had not just defeated us militarily. They had broken us psychologically. They had shown us a kind of warfare that we were not prepared to face. The old warrior walked to the center of the room, and that was when I learned the most terrifying truth of all about the human species. Zethkari walked to the window and stared out at the peaceful campus for a long moment. The young cadets waited quietly, sensing that their instructor was about to reveal something important. When he finally turned back to face them, his 4 eyes held a weight that seemed to have grown heavier with each part of his story. After the battle for New Portland ended, I thought the nightmare was over. I thought we had learned everything there was to know about human warfare. I was wrong. One final time, the old warrior activated the display screen, showing a galactic map with hundreds of human colonies marked across dozens of star systems. When I returned to Valthonian High Command to report on our losses, I expected to be punished for my failure. Instead, my superiors wanted to know everything about human tactics so they could develop countermeasures. Zethkari pointed to different colonies on the map. But while I was giving my reports, terrible news began arriving from across the galaxy. Every military force that had attacked human settlements was reporting the same impossible results. Overwhelming. Alien forces were being destroyed by tiny numbers of human defenders. The old commander walked closer to the cadets. The Krellian Empire had attacked a human mining colony with 10,000 soldiers. The colony had only 50 human workers, most of them civilians. The Krellians lost 7,000 troops before capturing the settlement. A young Krellian cadet made a sound of disbelief. The Zephyrian fleet had tried to blockade a human trade station. The station had no military ships, just cargo vessels and maintenance craft. But the humans turned their industrial ships into weapons and destroyed half the Zephyrian fleet before running out of fuel. Zeth-Kari activated a new section of the display, showing historical records from human databases. That was when our intelligence services began studying human history in detail. What we found changed everything we thought we knew about warfare. The screen showed images of ancient human battlefields, medieval castles, and more recent conflicts. Humans have been fighting wars for their entire existence as a species. Not just occasional conflicts like most civilized races, but constant, never-ending warfare. For thousands of years, human tribes and nations fought each other with increasing skill and brutality. The old warrior pointed to specific battles on the timeline. Spartans at Thermopylae. 300 human soldiers held off an army of hundreds of thousands for 3 days. They knew they would die, but they fought anyway to buy time for their people to escape. The display changed to show another battle, the defenders of the Alamo. Less than 200 humans against thousands of enemies. They could have surrendered and lived, but they chose to fight to the death to slow down their enemy's advance. Zeth-Kari walked to the center of the room. Marines at Iwo Jima. Paratroopers at Bastonia. In every human culture, in every era of their history, we found the same pattern. Small groups of human warriors choosing death over surrender, turning hopeless battles into strategic victories. A Mordakian cadet raised her hand. Sir, why would they choose to die instead of living to fight another day? That is the question. That kept me awake for months, Zeth-Kari replied. But the answer explains everything about why humans are so dangerous. The old commander activated a recording device. The sounds that came out were human voices singing in their own language. Every human child grows up hearing songs and stories about ancestors who died fighting impossible odds. They do not see these deaths as tragedies, they see them as examples to follow. He turned off the recording. Humans have a saying, death before dishonor. For them, surrendering when their people are threatened is worse than dying. They would rather sacrifice their lives than live with the shame of giving up. Zeth-Kari walked back to the display screen. But that was not the most frightening discovery. The most frightening discovery was that humans actually become more dangerous when they are outnumbered and outgunned. The screen showed psychological analysis charts comparing different species under stress. Most intelligent species become less effective as stress increases. Their decision-making suffers, their coordination breaks down, their morale collapses. But humans are different. The old warrior pointed to the human stress response charts. Under extreme pressure, humans become more focused, more creative, and more willing to take risks. They make better decisions when death is certain than when victory is possible. Zeth-Kari turned to face the cadets. They have another saying, the more dire the situation, the better we get. This is not just brave talk, it is literally true. Human brains are designed to work best under life or death conditions. A young Valthonian cadet asked, how is that possible? Their planet made them that way, Zeth-Kari explained. Earth is what xenobiologists call a death world. Everything on it is trying to kill everything else. The weather, the animals, the plants, even microscopic organisms. The display showed images of Earth's hostile environment. Humans evolved on a world where only the most adaptable, most aggressive, most cooperative individuals survived. Natural selection turned them into the perfect warriors over millions of years. The old commander walked closer to the cadets. But the truly terrifying thing is not their individual abilities. It is how they work together. When humans fight alongside each other, they form bonds that are stronger than family relationships. Zeth-Kari's voice became very serious. They call it unit cohesion. Human soldiers will die for strangers they have known for only a few days. They will sacrifice themselves for the good of their team without hesitation or regret. The old warrior activated a final section of the display, showing current galactic military policies. After the disasters of the Third Galactic War, every major power in the galaxy held emergency sessions. The Valthonian Empire, the Krellian Republic, the Zephyrian Federation, even the Synthetic Collective reached the same conclusion. The screen showed official documents with multiple alien signatures. Humanity was declared a protected species. Not because humans need protection, but because everyone else needs protection from humans. Several cadets gasped in surprise. No military force in the galaxy is authorized to attack human settlements without explicit approval from the Galactic Council. The approval process requires evidence that humans have committed unprovoked aggression, which has never happened. Zeth Kari walked back to his desk and sat down. Humans do not start wars. They do not conquer other species or enslave weaker races. They are actually quite peaceful when left alone. But if you threaten their homes or their families, they become the most dangerous enemy in the known galaxy. The old commander looked around the room at the stunned faces of the young cadets. The human colonies are now under the protection of the Combined Galactic Fleet. Not to keep humans from leaving their worlds, but to keep other species from being foolish enough to attack them. Zeth Kari stood up slowly. I have spent 20 years studying human military history and psychology. I have read their literature, learned their languages, and tried to understand their culture. He walked to the window one final time. What I learned is that humans do not fight to win. They fight to make sure their enemy loses, even if it costs them everything. They would rather die than see their loved ones harmed. The old warrior turned, back to face the cadets. That, young warriors, is why the galaxy fears the human warrior above all others. Not because they are the strongest or the fastest or the smartest, but because they are the only species that becomes more dangerous when facing certain death. Zeth Kari walked to the classroom door. Your assignment for next week is to read the complete military history of humanity from their ancient wars to the present day. Pay special attention to any battle where humans were outnumbered by more than 5 to 1. He paused with his hand on the door handle. You will find that humans won most of those battles. Not through superior technology or numbers, but through superior will to fight. The old commander opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Class dismissed. And remember, if you ever encounter humans in combat, your best strategy is to surrender immediately and hope they are feeling merciful. As the cadets filed out of the classroom, Zeth Kari remained in the hallway, staring at nothing, even after 20 years. Even after telling this story hundreds of times, he could still hear the echoes of human voices singing in dark tunnels. He could still see the smile on young Sam Collins' face as he charged into certain death. The old warrior closed his eyes and whispered something in his native language, a prayer for the souls of brave enemies who had taught him the true meaning of courage. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the wind from the human embassy on the other side of the campus, came the faint sound of human voices raised in song.